Hurry on. So today we're going to be looking at Yoga Nidra and its applications, especially for yoga teachers. The aspects that we're going to be looking at when conducting a Yoga Nidra is first incorporating it into your own daily life, then looking at the environment necessary for practicing Yoga Nidra, some suggestions for using it in your class, different positions, sleep, then looking at how you will conduct a Yoga Nidra for an individual compared to a group lesson. We'll look at themes and also the practices to be done before and after a Yoga Nidra, plus a few other things to consider, and then moving into safety, trauma and limitations of Yoga Nidra, the choice of imagery, and then what happens if there is an emotional release, and then a few ideas for conducting sessions. So let's move into them. So first, if you are going to be teaching Yoga Nidra or any yoga practice, you also need to be practicing it yourself. So ideally, you should be practicing a Yoga Nidra which is especially designed for you with your personal sankalpa whenever possible. If it's especially designed for you, then you're going to be getting maximum benefit from that Yoga Nidra practice. Try to do it at a similar time each day so your body and mind is prepared. And Swami Satyananda actually recommends early morning between 4 to 6 p.m. or just before going to bed. But you can do it at any other time as long as it's not straight after eating, because that's going to make you sleep. And often Yoga Nidra, just after you get home from work, if you've been working all day, can also be beneficial because it can help you with that transition back to regular life at home. So especially if you're feeling a little bit tired from work, you do a little Yoga Nidra, especially a shorter one. It will increase your energy and make you feel a bit more focused and ready to do a few more things before you go to sleep. Now, also avoiding doing Yoga Nidra on your bed because of the association with sleep. So it's much higher chance that you'll go to sleep if you are laying on your bed. So better to be on a mat on the ground. Now, looking at the environment to practice Yoga Nidra in. So you want it to be quiet and ideally in a closed room, because then there's going to be less noise and it's also going to prevent interruptions. If it is an open area, like if it's outside, then it is recommended to cover the head and the body, which will just help to have that nice feel about it and to stop you feeling distracted by anything. The temperature should be comfortable, so not very hot and not very cold. And the room should be well ventilated, but not having any kind of breeze which would create a distraction. And talking on distractions, you also don't want any insects around, so especially thinking of mosquitoes or the big flies that can be very noisy. Now, semi-darkness is also recommended. Darkness is going to be inducing sleep more, and bright light is going to keep the mind attentive. So you want that semi-dark state. And that is going to help maintain the balance between introversion and also extroversion. Now, looking at some suggestions for using Yoga Nidra in your classes. So you want to make sure that the environment around is going to be clean and tidy, and that's going to help with the flow of energy in the room, and it's going to create a more peaceful, calming atmosphere. Some people like to use eye cushions. It is going to give a little bit more darkness, so not everyone is going to feel comfortable with that, especially if they do sleep too quickly or very deeply. In that case, you can put the eye pillow, if it does have lavender in, you can put it near the body, just so the person can smell that and it's going to be relaxing. So it's very common to have the eye cushions made out of wheat with a few lavender flowers inside. And this is just going to be promoting relaxation. Clothing should always be loose and comfortable. So you don't want to have very tight clothing. You don't want to be having very tight belts and things that are going to be restrictive. It can be nice to have a blanket, because the body temperature is going to be dropping. You might, if it is a bit warmer and you want to have something to make you feel more comfortable, you may just have a sheet instead. And one can also use cushions or bolsters to make themselves more comfortable. So especially if someone doesn't feel comfortable in Shavasana, then bolsters behind the knees can be more suitable. Now, a few other things to discuss about for classes. So music. Now, there's always two sides with the thoughts on music in a yoga class anyway. Some people absolutely love to have music and others find it very, very distracting. So if you are going to be using music in a yoga nidra, it needs to be really quiet and it has to be very soothing. So without any kind of beats. So for example, it might be ocean sounds, like the waves of the ocean. It might be a very simple flute or some other kind of nature sounds. And here this point is remembering that music can also bring up certain emotions. So there can be good emotions and there can be bad emotions. Some people hear the ocean sound and that can make them stressed because they might have had some negative experience with the ocean as well. So if you are going to be having music, you want to check in with everyone that they feel comfortable to have that music. Now also scent. So these days lots of people like to use essential oils, which can help to promote relaxation. And again, it's important that you check with your students how they feel about those particular scents. Some people can have very strong reactions or aversions towards certain scents. So it's good that you should use scents which are mostly very common. So things like lavender or citrus, not very strong scents like, say, patchouli or cedarwood or some of the others. So keep the most common ones and don't allow it to be too strong either. And same goes for incense. These days not many people use incense because there's too much smoke and it creates coughing. So if you are going to be using that, make sure that one feels very comfortable to have it. The students feel comfortable, and you might also prefer to have a door open so that there's going to be a little bit more airflow, as long as it's not going to be breezy. Then trying to conduct your yoga nidra in a room without too many distractions and sounds. So it will depend on where you're teaching as to what's possible for you. If you're teaching yoga nidra in a gym, then it can be very difficult. But if you're teaching in your own yoga studio and it's away from the road, then definitely it's going to be much easier to do. Now looking at positions. So we've talked a bit about this previously. So Shavasana is the recommended position and bolsters or cushions can be used if needed. If a pillow is used, it should be a thin pillow, because if you're going to use a very thick pillow, then it's going to be stretching the neck. The hands should be away from the body with the palms facing up. However, if that's not going to be comfortable for a person, then they can place their hands on top of one another, and they might want to have them on their chest with their elbows on the floor, or they may want to have their hands over their belly, wherever it's natural and comfortable for them. Then there's other positions that might be used, like Matsya Kriyasan, which is the flapping fish pose, which is especially helpful if someone is having back pain or sciatic pain. Makarasan is another option, the crocodile pose, though there is a much more tendency to sleep in that one, and there is a bit more in Matsya Kriyasan as well. Then side Shavasana. Side Shavasana is often used for pregnancy, but it can be used for other people as well. And Talagasan. Talagasan is the pond pose, so that's where we're laying on our back with our knees bent. So especially for someone who is having a little bit more back pain, that can be more beneficial to be in. Now sitting positions are also possible, so one may decide to sit in a chair, and that chair should be placed next to the wall so the head can rest, unless it's a very big chair like an armchair where there's a natural headrest there too. Or for a sitting position, one can also sit against the wall, so having the legs outstretched or having the legs crossed. And one can also do Yoga Nidra in the regular sitting position, so in a meditative position, if it's very comfortable for that person to do so. Swami Satyananda also says that Yoga Nidra can be done in a standing position, though I would think that that's a very advanced Yoga Nidra. Now looking at sleep. So for some people there's more chance of sleep, especially if they're very overtired or they're sleep deprived. And especially when someone is very new to Yoga Nidra, there's definitely more of a tendency for them to be sleeping. And as they keep practicing it each day or a couple of times each week, then they start to adjust and they find that they don't fall into that sleep state as quickly. So there's a few things that can help if someone does have a tendency to go to sleep. So first is changing the time of day. So it's not always possible to change the time of day if they have a set class, but if one is practicing at home, then they can experiment with the time of the day. So for example, if they're doing it very soon after lunch, then definitely there's more of a chance that they're going to be going to sleep. Then they can try to avoid positions such as Makarasan, crocodile pose, and Matsya Kridasan, the flapping fish pose, because there is much more of a tendency to sleep. In fact, many of us will naturally sleep in those positions in bed. Then keeping props to a minimum. If we have a lot of props, like we're having, bolsters behind the knees, and we've got a big pillow under our head, and we have, a few other things, then it makes us feel really, really, really comfortable, like we're just in a bed. So much more tendency to sleep. And that's where we move to the next one, avoiding the bed. So if one is practicing at home, try to avoid it. Then the next point is to shorten the Yoga Nidra. So if a person is always falling asleep in the half an hour Yoga Nidra, then try doing a 20-minute Yoga Nidra or even a 15-minute Yoga Nidra to see the difference. And then it might be that that person needs to repeat that short Yoga Nidra quite a few times, and then they can slowly start to have an extended Yoga Nidra. And also for teachers, to remind the students not to sleep. So you're saying it at the beginning, but you can also say it throughout the Yoga Nidra as well. So now looking at individual sessions. So you want to talk with your student about their reasons for doing yoga and what they're hoping to achieve from it. And they might have some very clear ideas about what they want, or they might not really know. They might not even understand what yoga can do for them. So the discussion needs to be had. They might already have some problems that they're hoping to solve with Yoga Nidra. Okay. And if you're a yoga therapist, you can go through their case in detail to find out what kind of physical or mental problems they might be having, and then catering a Yoga Nidra especially for them. Of course, that's going to take time. So if you're just going to see the student and they tell you all these things, you're not immediately going to be able to go and do that. So you may have to start with a simple Yoga Nidra that you're using commonly for lots of your students, but then later on when you've got the time, then you can make them that special Yoga Nidra. So they may want to work on releasing stress from past events or traumas. They might want to gain a different perspective. They might be wanting a change of direction in life. Some might actually want to clear their unconscious, the baggage inside. Others may want to improve their memory or increase their willpower. There's lots of different reasons why someone might want to do Yoga Nidra. Or it might be that you are recommending the Yoga Nidra to them because you think that's the most suitable technique to help them. When you're going to conduct the Yoga Nidra, you can also record it. And in that way, they'll be able to continue that practice every day. When you do the Yoga Nidra, you also want to make sure that you're going to get feedback afterwards. So checking how they're feeling, if any emotions were coming up, you might not ask them that immediately. You might just, check in with them a little bit. And if there's something that they want to let you know, then you're open and ready to listen. Now moving on to group classes. So in a group class, you want to make sure that everyone is physically separate. So you don't want anyone's hands touching. Make sure that they have their own space. And sometimes that's where blankets can be helpful, because then they feel a little bit cocooned and away from other people that are there in the room. Now keep the yoga nidra fairly comfortable. So you don't want to have too much strong imagery, and you want to have more of a focus on relaxation and stress relief. So it's really helpful if you have a few simple yoga nidra scripts that you can use for beginners or anyone who is new to yoga practice. And now a few more reasons why one might want to do yoga nidra is to remove physical, mental or emotional tension, to calm the mind, to train the mind, or to enhance creativity. And there's lots of simple yoga nidras that you can do which are going to help to achieve some of those. Now the next point is a common problem in group classes, which is about snoring. So if you've got one person who is snoring, now definitely it can be affecting the others around. If they're also in a deep sleep, then it's not going to, but generally there's going to be a mix of people, some who are in full sleep and some who are not at all. So the first thing is that you can start moving closer to the person who is snoring and keep speaking, because the volume of your voice is going to be getting louder when you're closer to them. So sometimes that can kind of shift them out of that deep sleep. You also want to be reminding people not to sleep. So like I've already mentioned, at the beginning of the class and throughout the class, you might decide that you want to repeat that when you're near to the person. Sometimes you may also walk around them, so they can feel the vibrations of you walking near them, or sometimes subconsciously they can just feel that you're close to them. If the snoring is really disturbing and they're still not stopping, then you might choose to very gently touch a part of their body, such as their fingertips. But it should be a last resort, because if you're going to be waking someone from that deep sleep state, they can wake up shocked, they can wake up frightened and very disorientated. So it's better if they can very naturally start to move away from that state. And if they always sleep, then you might want to use some of the previously discussed techniques. So looking at themes, so you may link the yoga nidra with the focus of your class. So for example, if you're doing a women's yoga class, you might do a yoga nidra which is especially for menstrual health, or even for a certain aspect related to women. If you're having other general classes, like specialized classes, you might decide to do back pain or healing. If it's just a general everyone class, then you might focus on stress. If you have a prenatal class, then you're going to focus on pregnancy, or a postnatal class, then a postnatal yoga nidra, or a children's class. Or you might also be conducting classes for particular diseases, like you might have all students are having asthma, or all students are having diabetes. So you can definitely give the yoga nidra specific for that at that point. Now, other themes that you might have, there's some examples here. So focusing on the chakras, and you may also notice that for some of our therapy yoga nidras, we do focus on a particular chakra if it is related to a certain disease. So for example, if you are working, you're doing a yoga nidra for someone with a heart condition, then you're going to focus on anahat. Okay. If you're going to be working with people who are having lots of fears, then you may be working on Muladhara chakra. So you might focus on a particular chakra, or you might be looking at all of the chakras in that yoga nidra. And same with the koshas, you might be focusing on a particular one, or you may be going through all of them. Now, a few other themes which you might want to integrate into your yoga nidras: earth connection, which is something that's really quite important at the moment, or nature connection. Self-love, self-care, the seasons, so especially with the changes of the seasons, it can be nice. The elements like water, fire, earth. You may do a morning yoga nidra or an evening one. So in that you may talk, for example, if it's the morning yoga nidra, you may talk more about the beginning of the day and new starts and all of that. For an evening one, you may talk about going through your day and how you were feeling and what kind of emotions it brought up and clearing the slate for the next day to come. You may be focusing on trauma, or you may be focusing on the movement of prana in the body or the nadis. So there's lots of different options when you're making your yoga nidras. So looking at pre and post yoga nidra practices. So before doing a yoga nidra, it is recommended to do asanas and a little bit of pranayama, or at least a little bit of stretching to give some movement to the body so one doesn't feel the need to move during the session. So especially if you're going to be conducting yoga nidra as a class, then it is nice to do some kind of movement, whether it is some asanas or some Surya Namaskar or just some simple movements for the body before moving into that yoga nidra. Now, post yoga nidra, it's really important to come out of the practice very slowly. So using the steps that we've discussed in the externalization stage, because when people are coming out of the yoga nidra, they might be feeling very sleepy, or if they've moved too fast, they might be feeling disorientated, or they might even be feeling frightened because of the depths of the relaxation. You know, some people, they really get into a dreamlike state and they wake up and there's other people around and it can make them feel very uncomfortable. Sometimes they can feel worried that, oh, what kind of sleep was I in? Was I snoring? Was I this? Was I that? So it's really important that it's very gradual. So once they wake up, start moving, then asking them to come to a sitting position can be helpful. It might be that you let them rest or roll to the side for some time and then slowly coming up at their own pace. Chanting Om can be really helpful to do at this point because it will bring focus. So if they are feeling a little bit sleepy, not very clear, then that's going to be good. Or even a couple of nice deep breaths. Brahmari is a good option, the hummingbee breath, because that's also going to have those nice vibrations, which is going to bring a little bit of clarity. And it's also nice to do a few stretches, which they can do when they're laying down on their backs, or also from a sitting position, even to come up to Vrikshasana, tree pose at the end, just to stretch out their body. And you may also want to have some discussions after the yoga nidra about how everyone felt. So just checking in and answering questions is really important so that they feel supported and they feel it's a comfortable environment that if anything was to come up, they're supported by you. So there's a few other things to think about as well. So with your voice, now everyone's voice is going to be different, and generally you're going to be attracting students who feel comfortable with your voice. But you do want your voice to be fairly gentle. You want it to be calm. You don't want to have like a very nervous or stressed voice. It should be clear, steady, and also consistent in tone. And you want to make sure that the volume is going to be suitable for that room. So the person shouldn't need to shout. The teacher shouldn't be shouting so that the students can hear. But also it's important that it's not too quiet either, because otherwise students are going to be straining to try to hear your instructions. Now, depending on culture, it might be a little firmer. You'll find that some cultures are comfortable with a more strict way of giving instructions, which is absolutely fine as well. You have to do your instructions in the way that everyone feels comfortable with. You want to make sure the atmosphere is going to be calm, but also relaxed. And you don't want to allow your mind to start wandering, which can happen when you're reading a yoga nidra because you're also becoming very relaxed while you do the Yoga Nidra. And you don't want to be bringing in any emotions that you might be feeling as you conduct it. Of course, positive emotions are going to be helpful in the class, but if you start thinking about something else that is maybe happening in your life and you stop the focus of the Yoga Nidra that you're conducting, then it can be a problem. And we all know this as yoga teachers, that it's really important that we don't bring any issues that we might be having into the space. It's important to be having that nice, calm, relaxed atmosphere. Also making sure that you're giving pauses when needed. Sometimes a short pause, sometimes a little longer. Remind them to stay awake, as we've mentioned. And also avoiding very long quiet periods. And if you know that your students have a tendency to sleep, then it's better to keep those shorter. So next, looking at safety, trauma, and limitations. So Yoga Nidra is designed to bring up a variety of unfamiliar sensations in the body, as well as emotional experiences and subconscious memories or impressions. So it's really important that you're going to be creating that safe space. It should be supportive, it should be open, and it should be caring. Students should feel comfortable to express themselves if needed. And this should be the case not only for Yoga Nidra, but for all of the yoga practices that you teach. So understand limitations of your students. Not everyone is comfortable to look inside. They may not want to face certain aspects of themselves. They may need additional support through other yogic techniques, or they might need counseling. It's important to know what your limitations are going to be as well as a yoga teacher, and when you feel that they're going to need something extra from someone else. So you need to work slowly and progressively with that student and at the pace that they're going to be comfortable with. We will know that some people can be averse to Yoga Nidra in any form. Some students don't even want to do Shavasana. They don't want to close their eyes. It can create agitation for them. So this can be due to if they're very, very stressed or they're very, very anxious. It can be because they've been abused in the past or they've suffered other kinds of traumas. So when you have students like this, there are other yoga practices that might be more suitable for them to begin with. And then slowly as they start those practices, then you can start to incorporate Yoga Nidra. There shouldn't be any kind of pressure. There shouldn't be a hurry at all. And when you are going to be dealing with students like this, what you want to do is start with the Shavasana and then slowly start to lengthen that Shavasana and then build from there. So you can start to put in imagery in, breathing in, and all of this kind of thing. But you want to make sure that you're going to stick with really simple imagery, and then it can grow. So looking at imagery, so certain powerful symbols may create negative feelings or reactions if they associate the image with unpleasant experiences or fears. So care should be taken with certain images. So things like images that involve falling, drowning or deep water can create certain negativities, burning, things that might be falling onto oneself, death, and it might be necessary for you to put reassurances into a Yoga Nidra. You need to gradually increase the awareness of their mind, not traumatically increase it. Okay, so always start with very, very simple things and get feedback from them. Now, it will happen at some point that someone might have an emotional release. And this can happen from the Yoga Nidra, and it can also happen from other yoga practices as well. So you may find that you've conducted what you thought was a simple Yoga Nidra, but it's triggered something for your student. It might be, for example, that you were doing a visualization where they were going into the forest or they were climbing up a mountain, but then they've had a previous experience where maybe they got lost in the forest or they fell or something that was very traumatic for them. So it's created this emotional response. Sometimes they're ready for it, sometimes they're not. But the teacher should always be ready to support and listen. Sometimes the student just may need to express it, so they might need to cry a little bit or make some other sounds. Sometimes they might just want to sit with those emotions and just observing them. It's really important to let the student know that any emotions that are coming out is going to be having a cleansing effect, and it's positive, which can be really hard for the student at the time, but to get that perspective is definitely very helpful. And also reminding them that it is a healing effect. Now, they might need some other yoga practices afterwards, such as Om chanting or some pranayam, and this can just help to stabilize them a little bit more and give them a little bit of focus and a bit more relaxation. Certain asanas can be beneficial as well. So, for example, sometimes doing child's pose may be helpful. And when possible, you can encourage them to observe any emotions that may arise with detachment. So, okay, it's a little bit more of an advanced technique, but many students can do it. So, especially if they have been working on releasing some of their emotions inside, and especially if it's been a one-on-one sessions that you've been conducting with them, then they may be able to do this in a better way. And for our last slide, just looking at some ideas for conducting sessions. So the length of your yoga nidra. So ideally between 15 to 40 minutes. For someone who is more anxious or if they're very restless, so those people who don't really want to stay still for very long, or for those who fall asleep very quickly, because we know sometimes people fall asleep within like a minute. So for those, it's better to have a short yoga nidra. For those who have done yoga nidra and feel very comfortable, then 30 minutes is going to be very good. 30 minutes is a good all-rounder. And if they are happy and they want to work on it a bit more, then you can extend it to 40 minutes. Some people even conduct up to 60 minutes of yoga nidra, but you've got to remember that they're staying in that one position for that length of time, and it can get uncomfortable to be like that. So ideally, the yoga nidra should be practiced after asana and pranayam. So for example, you might teach a class of a 1-hour asana and pranayam, and then a 30-minute yoga nidra afterwards. Or even 15-minute yoga nidra is still going to have really good benefits. And also thinking that if you're teaching, say, a kids class, the yoga nidra is definitely going to be shorter. You're not going to do a half-an-hour yoga nidra. But you'll hear more about that later. So think of the classes that you're going to be offering and think about what is the focus. If the focus is on stress relief, then yoga nidra may be a really large component of the class. It might be that you've got a 1-hour class which is focusing on stress. So you might do 20 minutes of different stretches and movements, 10 minutes of breathing, and half an hour of yoga nidra. You might have a class that's just yoga nidra. So they just come, they lay down, they follow yoga nidra, and they move out. Or you might incorporate yoga nidra into a workshop, a specialized workshop that you might be doing, which might be a couple of hours workshop or a half day or a full day workshop. So there's lots of different opportunities to incorporate yoga nidra and teach yoga nidra, and wishing you all the best for it. Hari Om.